We are live now. We were just sorry, ladies and gentlemen. We're just having a quick chat just backstage for a couple of moments. Then it's a mad dash for me on a Sunday. It's a busy day, but anyway, very pleased to welcome to the left of me. Well, actually, yeah, to my right. I'm confused. Anyway, in one corner, in the blue corner, we've got Dr. Ed Johnston, and in the other corner, we've got Tracy Keogh, all the way from Melbourne, beautiful Melbourne in Australia. Ed, could you tell us whereabouts in the UK you are? You are in the UK, yeah?
I'm in the UK. I'm in the southwest of England. I'm in Somerset, a little town called Wirral. Its nearest kind of landmark would be about Weston-super-Mare, if anyone's ever heard of that beach.
Yeah.
Been there. Yeah. I'm a native of Cheltenham.
Oh, okay. Yeah, not too far up the road.
Yeah. And I've got family, immediate family, relatives, uncle and auntie that live in Bridgewater.
Okay. 20 minutes down the road. My best friend lives in Bridgewater.
North Petherton, is it Petherton?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's great part of the world. And Tracy is originally from Bristol, aren't you?
I am. I was born in Southmead Hospital and spent many days at Weston-super-Mare. Yeah.
Okay, so it's sorry, Ed. If we start sounding like the Wurzels, you'll understand. Now then, I'm, as I say, delighted to have Tracy back on again, but also Ed for the first time. And I must say that your channel, Criminal Justice Natters, is definitely going from strength to strength, and you've got some. Well, we were just comparing the guests that you've both had, but I really wanted to find out first of all the idea behind Criminal Justice Natters. You know, what was your
like most good stories, they start in a pub. And
I like the sound of that.
I was talking to a pal of mine, and he was saying you should do this. People would be interested. You can probably get some good guests. And I thought about it, and I was okay. Let's try it. So I put it off for a few months, and then in November I started, and yeah, it's gone really well. My partner's really supportive of it. She's always thinking up of new people to come on and sort of angles we can try to tackle. And it's just basically trying to break down complex issues for everybody as well. And then the sort of Avery and Brendan cases just sort of snowballed from there as well. So it's been really enjoyable, and it's opened my eyes to such a massive community of sort of supporters and who believe in a miscarriage of justice, and that's so important. And whilst I understood that this community existed, I think the knowledge that the community has is astounding. Really, it's really great.
Absolutely, Tracy. Same question. I know you've answered this before, but the 6th Hour podcast. Why the name 6th Hour?
6th Hour because Brendan Dassey asking to go back to class in the 6th hour, I think, is a pivotal and poignant moment in, showing his innocence. And when I was coming up with the idea for the podcast, it was the first name that hit me, and I just, it stuck. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, and I guess the basis of the 6th Hour is about education, Ed. So when you talk about, there's a community here of people who are informed. There are so many people out there, educating and, having these discussions, or as I say, the conversation continues, and it can, and the idea that first came to me was when I saw Jerry and Dean in Melbourne. They were in Melbourne in the November of 2016. And I just remember, I think it was Jerry said that, it's the passing of the microphone. And I think that's pretty apt. It's an apt way to describe the community that, has formed around Making a Murderer, has formed around, Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey. Yeah, but one question I have for you, Ed, actually, is across your interviews of Laura and Dean and Jerry and, you know, most recently Kathleen Zellner,
Mm-hmm.
is there something that you've been struck? Is there something that struck you more than, you know, across those conversations? Is there something that stayed with you?
Certainly the innocence of those, the conviction in which they believe Brendan and Stephen are innocent, and their dedication to this particular cause, I thought was extremely enlightening. And I suppose in terms of Kathleen, because that one's really exploded, and I was really nervous before that one, and it was just how thorough she is, and how right, or you know, she believes she's right and has all the confidence in the world. And I just thought there's like as a legal academic, you know, we look at the idea of having a zealous advocate in your corner, and some of my PhD was based on whether or not defense lawyers are zealous in their protection, and she just fitted that zealous advocate profile so well. You know, leave no stone unturned. Best interests of the client are paramount, and I thought it's a matter of time before this is rectified in a small way by Stephen being sort of exonerated and released.
Yeah, there's a real impressiveness to her confidence, isn't there? You
Absolutely.
know, whether or not whatever is coming across is true or not, you're going to believe it because of how confident she relays it. Yeah,
absolutely, and the sort of how forthright she is with this as well. It's like it's compelling. I'm going to tell you what happened, and by the end of that conversation, I think you'd struggle to find someone who doesn't believe her. I mean, if you just look at her record, it speaks for itself. If the other high-profile cases that she's dealt with, she has a fantastic record. You
can imagine when she gets into court with that. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So somebody's just said that she's inspiring. Yeah. I think that's a great word to use. It's a great description.
I mean, you know, I get you saying about being nervous about interviewing Kathleen. Yeah. Is it true that she eats men for breakfast?
Wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. I wouldn't surprise me at all. You know, that I wanted to ask you a little bit about when you first watched Making a Murderer, Ed, and your thoughts on the documentary.
My thoughts on the documentary, I watched it when it came out. It was obviously sort of professionally interesting to me. But the biggest thing that sticks with me is Brendan's interrogation. The fact that, you know, there's no appropriate adult present, there's no lawyer present. And then, you know, I use the word lawyer or defender quite loosely in terms of how he was represented. You know, Len Kaczynski, and then the lie detector, and piecing, you know, jigsawing the prosecution's case for them. If you think about your role as a defense lawyer, it's to advance your client's best interest. That's your primary duty. And whichever jurisdiction you practice law in, your code of ethics is going to say something like that as one of your paramount duties. And he was failed by the system, and awfully failed. And it's horrible, because we see this and we think about this, you know, perhaps maybe as isolated incidents, but there will be other children. There will be other children in this position without legal representation, and the police thinking, right, we can get an easy conviction here, because once you confess to something, it's extremely hard, almost nigh on impossible, to retract that and have the court or the jury believe any retraction. Because the old adage of, why would you confess to something unless you did it? And it's rubbish, and it's appalling. And that in itself is a miscarriage of justice. The system is set up to defend people, and we ebb away with it with various pressures of resources, economy, pressures that the police and the prosecution have to find someone. And I accept all of those concerns, but they should not trump the paramount idea that you are to be defended from an accusation by the state. Because no truth or innocence, or guilt or innocence, is established until the trial stage anyway. So everything that leads up pre-trial, you need a defense. And I that's my takeaway from Making a Murderer. I think it's horrific.
I would imagine, Tracy, you've got a lot of thoughts on similar to Dr. Ed there. So
absolutely. I think we know you can roll it back to the suppression hearing, where Kaczynski absolutely failed Brendan. He conceded that Brendan wasn't in custody for the Feb 27th and March 1st interrogations. He let go of Miranda arguments that potentially could have been something for Brendan now. I think, for me, Kaczynski, I think it's a no-brainer, and O'Kelly were working as an arm of the prosecution. And because you've got, the Strickland bar for defense counsel behavior in the US, which is so incredibly low, we know that, lawyers have fallen asleep. They've turned up to court drunk, and they're still okay under Strickland. So Kaczynski, he was certainly not in Brendan's corner. It's a huge travesty, But then, we can talk about Fremgen and Edelstein as well, and perhaps, from my liking, they were as ineffective, but just not as malevolent about it.
I mean, can I ask you both the question from an Australian and a UK point of view? Are we happy in the UK, in Australia, of saying, well, what happened to Brendan would never happen here?
Well, I can speak from the Australian perspective insofar as investigators over here do use Reid, but they also use the peace method as well. We certainly don't have, an overwhelming wrongful convictions of juveniles based on false and coerced confessions. I mean, if you're aged under 18, in the state of Victoria where I live, for example, if you're aged under 18, you have mental, disabilities, then you cannot be interrogated by the police without, an attorney or a parent present. And if that's not possible, then you get what is called I've got the term here, it's called a trained independent person. Now, they're not there for legal advice, but they're there to help the juvenile understand what is happening to them in the interrogation room. So would it happen here? Absolutely. Our Indigenous youth are overrepresented in the justice system in this country. Would not be too different to the US in that respect. But I do think that there are more protections in place for juveniles in the interrogation room here than the US, for sure. And recording has to happen unless it's a summary offence. So if it's drunkenness or something like that, but above a summary offence, then it has to be recorded.
Much the same here in England. So all police interrogations are recorded under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, and that's been in force. The Act is 1984, but it came into law in 86. So they have to record police interrogations. Every person under Section 58 of that Act has a right to a defence lawyer. That can be a free defence lawyer that's provided by the state during the police, or it's the right to legal advice. It may be a trained, what's called a police station representative, or it could be a defence lawyer, or you can bring your own one in. But certainly if you are under the age of 18, you will have an appropriate adult present, either the lawyer or an appropriate adult or a court-appointed adult. So you would have some form of safeguarding. However, the biggest problem there is the conversations you have with the appropriate adult. If you only have that, in private are not privileged. So the appropriate adult could pass stuff on to the police. Whereas your conversations with your legal advisor, be it the police station rep or a defense lawyer, they are protected by privilege and they will not be passed on to the police. The biggest problem with both of those things, especially in terms of the defense lawyer, take up is really low, despite the fact that this is free. It's less than 50% of all suspects in the police station actually ask for legal advice. So in England and Wales, we're trying to improve the police interrogation stage, but take up is low. But frankly, I think the police do have an appetite to change and to encourage you to take legal advice, because they then think any admissions you make in front of a lawyer, they're easier to kind of argue and justify if you change your mind later at trial. And we tape record these interviews as well. So the idea that we can't be oppressive or hectoring or bullying you. So yeah, it has greatly improved, but I still think there's massive room for improvement.
Sure. Can I just correct something that I should have done right at the start, and that is simply to mention, because I know that McGilla is asking this question, and I'm sure some of you as well will be wondering about this. Where can you get a full list of all of today's schedules and the links to the channels? If you go to the video that appeared just before Sharon Sunshine and Dr. Sandra Lean, if you go to the video, Making a Murderer, Keep Talking Till They're Walking with the Dude, the one that I posted just before we started off, Juris, many thanks, has put together a whole list of everybody who's on, what time they're on, and who the host and who the guest is, and the links to the channel. So many thanks to Joris, our great supporter there in the Netherlands. Dr. Eds, I'd like to ask you a little bit about, therefore, your criminal justice natters is your sort of YouTube channel, but as a daytime job, you are a sort of professor of law.
Yeah,
you have students.
I'm a senior lecturer in law at the University of the West of England. I teach across 3 modules. I lead 2.5 of them. I teach across criminal procedure and punishment, organised crime and criminal justice. I take the criminal justice half of that, and I teach on sexual offences and offending. Right. So I probably have about 150 to 200 students a year.
Wow. And just before we started, you mentioned David Rudolf.
Yeah.
How did you manage to get David Rudolf to come across to the university to give a lecture?
So my partner and I saw David Rudolf in Cardiff in Wales on one of his tours, and we kind of met him afterwards, and I had a picture and stuff, and we went back to our hotel and we had a few drinks, and my partner said, you should email David to see if he wants to come over. So I had a few drinks. I was a bit confident. So I emailed him, and he responded, the next day saying, yes, he would be keen. We sorted out the logistics of it, fees in transport and everything else. And he just came over. It took about a year to organize, but he came over. We sold some tickets for the university, and he tacked on a couple of other dates around the tour, and he was brilliant. Absolutely. I'd never put an event on in my life, and it was just me left here, and he was so helpful, and we just remained in touch after that, really. Yeah.
So he didn't swear about the PowerPoint presentation then, like he does in the staircase, because that is classic, isn't it? That's one of the classic scenes.
Yeah, it's a good one, and I can fully empathise with technology not working.
Did he cover the bit about Sami Shabani?
I don't think so.
Oh, that is a real treat. That is a real treat. I'm not going to spoil it for anybody, but you must, if you ever get a chance to hear David Rudolf talking about Sami Shabani. He did that in Melbourne, didn't he, Tracy?
Yeah.
Or was it in Amsterdam? I saw that.
He had PowerPoint issues in Melbourne as well. If I remember correctly.
Didn't he? Yeah.
He did. Yes.
Yeah. But he got there in the end, didn't he? With the owl theory.
Yeah, I remember meeting him afterwards, and I can't help myself. I just said to him, I think the owl theory is incredulous, David. And I sort of, like, my husband was just looking at me like to say, you're not making friends, Tracy. You're not making friends. But one question I wanted to ask you, Ed, was I've been fortunate to speak to a few professors of law in my time who have used Brendan's case particularly as an instructive as part of law curriculum. They've used the case files as materials and things like that. Now, I understand that the UK is a different beast in terms of the legal system, but from my research and my conversations that I've had, the elements of a false confession and a coerced confession are pretty universally common, I would imagine. Is it something that you would consider doing, introducing into the curriculum?
We do in part of criminal justice. A colleague of mine, Dr. Tom Smith, takes the sort of false confessions element to it, because we in the early 1990s we had a raft of cases go to the Court of Appeal in terms of fabricated evidence and false confessions as well. The Cardiff 3 in particular, I don't know if anyone's familiar with that case, where, very similar to Brendan, you had a young man, not quite sort of a child, but still a young man, sort of below the national average in terms of intellect. And he was hectored and bullied into making an admission until he finally did. And we're talking hours of officers in your face, screaming at you, intimidating, bullying. And what happened in the original trial, the prosecution quite cleverly didn't play any tape of this interview. They merely read the transcript. So the court didn't actually hear the tone and tenor of the questions until the appeal case. But by that stage, they had spent a number, I think it was around 6 years in prison. The official name of that is Paris, Abdullahi and Miller. It's also known as the Cardiff 3, and it's well worth looking at, because they were convicted solely on, not solely, but that confession was a substantial plank to the rest of the prosecution's case against the other two defendants. Yeah. And would it be in the UK, like we see with Brendan, right? So the confession is the gold standard. There's no evidence. There's no evidence that trumps the confession. And in Brendan's case, there is zero evidence. Yeah. In the UK, would a false confession get past the legal system without corroborative evidence? You can't convict on confessions alone in England and Wales. Okay. So there does need to be a bit of corroborating evidence. But once you have painted this picture of a false confession and you have that, that's worth, in percentage terms, 70, 80% of your case. We've seen from cases around the world, police and prosecutions can then piece evidence around that confession to make that fit. But once you have that golden sort of sought after idea of the false confession, it's very hard to move backwards from that. Yeah.
Okay, I've got a quick question. Now, you probably both know this quote word for word, but it's the one by Seth Waxman, where he says that there's not a single judge in any of the courts that Brendan has been through that thinks that Brendan is guilty. So why is he still where he is? I mean, I would be happy if the judges were to come out and say, look, we know he's not guilty, but, the damage to Brendan is that, he gets to spend, till he's 58 in prison. But if we were to release him, the floodgates might open, there would be all this, carnage to the system, and so therefore they're keeping him there almost. What are they keeping there as almost as a noble cause, as a damage limitation? Why on earth? Somebody put in the chat, why is Brendan still where he is? And I know that's a long question, but when you're given the fact that Seth Waxman talks about all the judges knowing that it's a false confession, knowing that he's innocent, it just the mind boggles. I just don't understand it. Any thoughts?
Well, I think EDPA has an awful lot to do with it. And I think if you throw in a hefty amount of judicial ignorance as well that we saw at the Seventh Circuit, that all of those are contributing factors to it. You've got a huge failure in the system and then in the processes that you have on appeal in a state court, that your case is heard by the judge that sentences you and convicts you in your original trial. That's has to be counterintuitive to the seeking of justice. But just in my layman's terms and opinion, I think that the procedural bar of EDPA. Having said that, I think the en banc majority hid behind EDPA, and as I've said before, when I was speaking to Professor Michelle Levine, at the time when Brendan's conviction was overturned, when the habeas corpus was granted in the August of 2016, there were people within the Wisconsin Department of Justice who were ready to let this go, who were ready to say, okay, let Brendan go, that were not comfortable with what happened to Brendan. But there was the minority who are like, no, it's that idea again of finality. It's the idea of protecting convictions and prosecution. I think all of those elements have contributed to it.
I would tend to agree with Tracy. I think the problem with the courts as well, that they, and certainly from research in England and Wales, that they are prosecution and police minded. So you can't just have, this balance of probability idea that, this person probably didn't do it. They are reluctant to release or acquit people because they believe and trust in both the prosecution and the police. And I think that is problematic. They're supposed to be a neutral arbiter of fact. They're not supposed to take sides. But I don't think that that's the case. And I think that's especially clear in what we saw with Laura and in Brendan's case. But I think that's the biggest problem there. It's the procedure that they hide behind by, we are protecting society, when you are not protecting society if you've got the wrong person in prison because the bad guy is still out there. And that seemed, I was speaking to my children the other day, and that, they're 9 and 10, and I'm contemplating bringing them on the show of what the kids understand by police and sort of criminal law. And they were like, well, you need to get the right person. It's not just any person. So if they can get that, it's 7 and 9, their correct ages rather. If they can understand that, why can't these learned judges? It's because they are reluctant to believe that their officers and what they stand for and what they buy into have got it so fundamentally wrong.
Yeah. And there's a reluctance as well to embrace, neuroscience and the findings in the adolescent brain and things like that have the last 20 years, I think, has become, more predominant in that area. And you see with the Seventh Circuit en banc, there was no recognition whatsoever. And the fact that the Supreme Court had the perfect vehicle to take, a juvenile justice case that they hadn't done in over 40 years at that time. For me, it just speaks to, the US doesn't seem to care an awful lot about kids in the justice system. And you've also got a justice system that's heavily privatized. Yeah. So, the prison system makes a lot of people a lot of money. So the idea that people, that they wrongfully convicted people are filling up, 8x10s across the US, and how can we not possibly get them out, is because they're worth money to someone. And I also think that plays into it.
Absolutely. And I think the idea of privatized prisons or privatized contractors that offer certain prison service, it's seeping into England and Wales with private prisons. We don't have many of them, but there are a lot of people, who would have vested interests in this, like you just said, Tracy, what are you going to need in order to make a privatized prison profitable? People to stay in them. And I also think as well, it's certainly here, and I have to be a bit careful of when I say this to my students, but what we have is, up until about the mid-1990s, politicians in their political manifestos didn't really comment on criminal justice issues or crime and disorder issues. And it became a massively popular weapon that we're going to keep you safe. But the actual levels of crime in England and Wales have steadily declined over the course of the last decade. But then if you contrast it with the fear of crime, how do people think? You look at, there's certain alarms and security systems for your house, and you don't want to walk down this particular street, or don't trust anyone in a hoodie, or whatever it is. The fear of crime is skyrocketed. So people think they need this protection. But in all actual fact, in this country, you are probably the safest you have ever been, because the levels of crime have dropped. No, of course there is crime, but it's a money winner. It's a vote winner for people, and no one is ever going to get elected that says, this is, I say this to my students.
Crime. Yeah.
We are going to only send people to prison for a minimum of 20 years, and that's going to be for the most serious offences. Take the Nordic model, for example. In my opinion, anything under 9 months in prison, there is no rehabilitative effect of sending someone to an overcrowded prison for 9 months to serve 4.5 of them in the prison estate, the other 4.5 on license outside. You're not going to get on to treatment programs. You're not going to get on to learn any educational or professional ways that can equip you to fulfill a law-abiding life. We need a drastic shift in how we treat offenders. And once you've been in prison, so the reoffending rates between prison, being sent to prison, and say having community service, they're roughly about the same. Within 2 years, you're going to reoffend. About 50% of offenders will reoffend. Now, if those reoffending rates are almost the same, go for the option with the lesser social stigma. That makes it easier for you to get a job, to get housing. You're not this shamed person that's been to prison. The vast majority of prisoners in England and Wales, and there are 77,000 in prison, are for low-level offending and non-violent offending. It absolutely is not the right place for them. But no one's going to get elected doing that.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, going back, sorry, that was very interesting, Ed. But going back to EDPA, which was the judge that says, EDPA doesn't paralyze the system? Was it Williams or Rovner that said that in her
I can't remember.
It was one or the other, wasn't it? She said it doesn't paralyze the system. So given that,
I'd say it was Rovner. Sorry.
Yeah. Williams, Rovner, and no, it wasn't Sykes, was it? It was Williams, Rovner, and Wood.
Yeah.
Were the three, weren't they? Yeah. Sykes was the real nasty. Telling Laura, actually, you have to lose. You have to lose. It's like, for goodness sake, shut up, woman. This is a very good question. We mentioned the judges are not forthright. What about the governments, the mainstream media, and the general public? This is from Mark in Canada.
I think we see that, don't we? Like, if using Making Murderer, using Stephen and Brendan's case as an example, let's look at the media at that time in Manitowoc. It was almost rabid. I've done a lot of YouTube deep dives on media from the time, and there's one particular clip of a lady who's talking about, that these types of stories are hot at the moment. And she's talking about this, and you get this sense of like, but there's two men's lives on trial. One of them is a child, and we see the Kratz press conference where you've got a total obliteration of the presumption of innocence for both gentlemen, and then you have media every single day of the trial. Like, there's this running commentary. You have Kaczynski, who spends more time with the media than he does with his client. I think how do you counteract that as a defense? What chance did those boys have? And I don't think it's not particular to them. I mean, we've over in Australia, we have the case of Lindy Chamberlain, and she was definitely tried by media, and that media shaped public opinion. Like, as you spoke before, Ed, the idea of being fearful of something because the media is shaping that narrative. And that was definitely part of it with that particular case. They shaped the idea that her religion, in some way, there was a dark malevolence to it that must have contributed to her actions, so people became fearful of that.
I think that's a massive problem in terms of, we have 24/7 news channels covering all the massive stories all the time. One of the shocking things about Making a Murderer as well was the Kratz daily press conference. And when I spoke to Jerry and Dean on the show, I asked them, is that normal? Because I don't understand how anyone can have, fair trial rights protected when you have, I likened it to, a football manager giving like post-game sort of ideas of what happened during the game. It was disgusting. And both Jerry and Dean said that, they were forced into doing this to counter that. They said that Kratz shouldn't do it. So they then took it in turns to who goes first and second on alternate days, just so there was some semblance of a level playing field. But the media get in front of the story and they control the narrative. And, that's especially true in small towns. You don't have a chance. You do not have a chance. Yeah. We've seen it in England with people who have been accused and trialed by media only to be found, not even remotely related. There was a case in Bristol where I was born, and it's just up the road from where I live. About sort of 10, 15 years ago, a young lady was killed just before Christmas, and her landlord was this wacky older guy. Christopher Jeffries was his name. He had like mad scientist hair, and he was portrayed as this, perverted maniac that wanted this attractive young architect. He had nothing to do with this. Nothing. And they eventually caught the real killer, who was her neighbor. But Jeffries spent weeks in the paper of having his character assassinated, and he had to cut his hair and he, change his life because of how he was portrayed. It's maddening. So.
I mean, going back to the Kratz's press conferences, I think it's absolutely stunning that he actually alternated with Mike Holbach. I mean, that to me seems bizarre. The fact that they're getting Mike to be this family spokesperson in order to try and cement the guilt of Stephen Brendan. I mean, he got caught out so many times. The grieving process could last days. What? Your sister's only missing, and the grieving process could last days. And then when he says, just pop the video in your video player, watch that, and that's the whole case. And bless her, even Emily Matasic, who's a known guilty journalist, says, and have you watched it yourself, Mike? No.
Mike Halbach, though, was the emotional ploy, wasn't he?
Yes.
He that was the state, and Kratz would have appreciated his wanting to address the media, because it was definitely an emotional ploy.
I have quite an issue with this, and I don't wish to come across as heartless or not concerned by victims of crime. But there has been, especially in England and Wales, there has been a slow seep in the victims of crime taking centre stage in the criminal justice process. And I think we have to fundamentally remember we are going with admissible evidence that has passed various evidential thresholds in which someone finds someone guilty or innocent of the alleged crime. Emotion does not come into this decision. You have to be, and I know it's difficult and I know it's sad. And like I said, I don't wish to appear heartless, but we have to remember the black and whites of this. We are talking of facts that have passed evidential thresholds to get into a courtroom that 12 people are allowed to listen to, and only consider those things when deciding whether or not someone has done it. And I think the sort of Mike Holbach press conferences is like Tracy said, the emotional idea of pulling on the heartstrings to convince someone of, I'm going to remind you that my sister's dead. And that's a dreadful, dreadful situation to be in. And, I would never want to be in that situation. But we have to remember what the process and the system is designed to do. It needs the removal of emotion to make cold and hard decisions on facts that you hear in that room and that room only.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, the big problem is, and dare I say it, I seem to be sort of trumpeting this as on a bit of a sort of lone furrow, as it were. But the fact that, in Soham, 2003, Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, that case was solved by Maxine Carr slipping up and referring to one of the girls in the past tense by saying she was a nice girl. And immediately the press, the Sky reporter at the time and the producer said, to the police, you need to look at this, because this is a breakthrough in the case, and it's what solved it. What did Wisconsin journalists do with Mike Holbach saying the grieving process could last for days? Nothing. Yeah. They just parrot the state, don't they? It's pretty sick.
And they did all the way to the Seventh Circuit. You saw when Kratz came out after the first, I think it was the first orals or the second, or perhaps both. They all swarmed around him, and he has nothing to do with the case at this stage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Going forward, though, Ed, I really wanted to ask you this particular question because you're involved on the coalface, as it were, of bringing along new lawyers. What effect do you think documentaries like Making a Murderer and all the other ones, The Staircase, will have on your students going forward? Do you think they'll have a different perspective?
I'd like to think so. What I ask someone a question, like on any course, right before we start the year, like lecture 1, when we talk about criminal justice, do you think our system is too harsh or too soft? And year on year, they answer the same way, that it's too harsh and we need to be harsher in terms of how we punish. And then I've got 6 months to kind of give them evidence to change their mind. But what I think these types of miscarriages of justice do is open people's eyes to the idea that what the police and the prosecution tell you is not the full story. And using a defense lawyer and having a defense advocate is not an admission of guilt. It re-emphasizes the importance of that person in the cog, in the machine, in order to get justice, because that's what everybody wants, justice. Now, people's arguments of justice will differ, but you need everybody to play, and you need a level playing field. And what I think these shows do is show you that the defense has to run uphill and the prosecution and the police are playing downhill. And they have the raft of resources already. They already had a competitive advantage. So I think it opens people's eyes sort of on day one that things aren't necessarily what you should believe in media representations of big cases.
Sure. Tracy, your 6th Hour podcast, any interesting guests on the horizon?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got an interesting week ahead of me. I've got Professor Brandon Garrett. We're going to be discussing EDPA, as it would be. And then on Friday, I'm speaking with James Trainham, and we're talking about how police generate false confessions. The following week, I have a roundtable with James Trainham, Dave Thompson from Wicklander Zalowski, and a gentleman called Matt Jones, who has worked and developed and alongside people like the FBI and what have you in an alternative interrogation method to read. So the roundtable is all about, obviously, interrogation methods in the US and talking to Wicklander Zalowski and the interrogation methods that they teach, and Matt Jones and the interrogation methods that he's teaching and how that was developed and how that came to be. So yeah, I've taken a few days off from work because there's a pretty hefty amount of research in front of me for the next week. Yeah.
And same question for yourself. Who's next on Criminal Justice Matters?
I've got one that I can't too much about because
Sure,
it's not firmed up yet. But
absolutely.
I mean, pretty deep discussions, and it would be massive, and it would be of interest to everybody. But I'm hoping that one comes off. My latest one, or my next one, is definitely going to be someone. There was on Friday in England and Wales, we had the Horizon post office scandal. That basically, you know, 60 odd people were convicted of fraud. And it fell apart on the idea that the disclosure officer who hands evidence over to the defence marked certain items not to be disclosed because it would undermine the prosecution's case, which fundamentally defeats the disclosure rules. So the disclosure is my primary research interest. And I've got someone called Nick Gould coming on who's involved in that case to talk through the importance of fair disclosure and what happened and the impact that those miscarriages of justice had on the postmasters and sub-postmasters. So, yeah, I then need to take a break. It's marking season at work, so I will have exams and coursework to mark. And I've got a paper with Jerry Butin to finish, or start, rather.
Excellent.
Yeah, so it's all go.
Yeah. Sorry, that's pretty interesting stuff. You know, there was something else I was going to ask you. Oh yes, talking about. We always like to finish off with just a little bit of fun. It's a little bit of humour. Tracy already knows what's
He's done
coming.
this to me before, Ed. He's done this to me before.
Tracy already knows what's coming. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to very quickly mute and stop my camera, and I'm going to let Tracy ask the crunch question.
Okay. I'm not doing that. Paul, I can't remember it. But one thing I do want to ask you, Ed, while we've got rid of Paul for a second.
Yeah, I'll go for a second.
No, I was reading through some of your papers, and there was one paper that struck me. In particular, it was about the brain electrical oscillation. And that struck me as being something really similar to the brain fingerprinting that Kathleen Zellner has used with Stephen Avery. Would that be right?
I think it's the exact same thing. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No, that I found that really interesting. And the other thing that I found interesting was that polygraphs, obviously in the US, are used as another, part of the coercion process.
Yeah.
And insofar as they're not admissible in court. In the UK, in your papers, you talk to the fact that polygraphs are used more in post-conviction.
Post-conviction, so the standards of evidential thresholds are lower post-conviction in terms of managing the offender. It goes on a balance of probabilities opposed to beyond reasonable doubt. So post-conviction, and especially in terms of sexual offenders, polygraphs are used a lot. And I think they kind of have a place. I do have reservations with polygraph testing, but I think we probably err on the right side of how they're being used. They definitely shouldn't be admissible at trial. But I think in terms of managing someone's behavior, asking them questions about what they've been looking at and what they want to do and what they still find sexually attractive, I think they could have a place at the post-conviction stage when thinking about releasing these people back into society.
Do you not think that the physiological reactions that determine the findings from a polygraph are so open to misinterpretation? So, for example, if somebody's just anxious sitting there having to answer those questions, you're going to have a rapid heartbeat, right? And that's going to be a little flag for the polygraph. I suppose it's similar to Reid insofar as that it's wholly concerned with behavioural and physiological reactions, but there's not ground in science at all.
Not at all. And the converse is obviously true as well. If someone's been, had 10 or 20 polygraphs, they're going to be far more relaxed than someone that's having their first one. Their physiological responses are going to be different. So no, I completely accept that point.
Yeah. Sorry, Paul.
No, you're absolutely fine. Thank you for that. It's It's just that I should explain that obviously this whole event has been inspired by obviously our great friend Eric Ose and Dr. Ed. I don't know if you ever managed to get to see any of Eric Ose's videos.
I haven't, not yet. No.
He was unfortunately, obviously, passed away last year, August the 1st. He was only 44 years old, but me and him, we used to do a lot of lives together. We went to Manitowoc together. We went even to Australia, where Tracy Keogh arranged it. She's like the Jim will fix it over there in Australia. Fixed it for the dude to actually meet David Rudolf, Laura Nyrider, and Steve Drizzen. And when the dude had actually finished speaking with David Rudolf, turned to face Steve Drizzen, and Steve Drizzen just said, "Oh, you're Eric Ose."
Oh wow!
So
pretty cool.
And then put on his Control Question T-shirt, which is something that I would love to have you back on again and to discuss further that particular problem. But no,
sure.
what we did was we had this playful argument. It went on for, I think, about 3 years. Is that right, Tracy?
It wouldn't surprise me, Paul.
Yeah. Question number one: have you ever seen this character before?
No, I don't think so.
No. Okay. It's a bit unfair to ask you this then, because that's Captain Crunch.
Oh, Captain Crunch, yeah. He's
Captain
the cereal
Crunch.
mascot, isn't he?
Exactly, yes. And in the he even had his own cartoon series, right. In which, and I'll give you a little bit of background here. Dawes Butler is the voice of Yogi Bear, Huckleberry Hound, the Jetsons. Dawes Butler, very, very famous voiceover person. The dude tried to tell me that Captain Crunch was British because he's got a naval uniform, and a bit like Captain Meltshot, he's got a big bushy moustache.
Yeah,
I would love your opinion on whether Captain Crunch has been wrongfully accused of being British by Eric Ose.
He looks British. It does look like a naval uniform. I thought maybe he might be some form of admiral, but in the Navy. But I couldn't say with any degree of certainty. I would make an awful expert witness on this.
Okay. Tracy.
I suppose it comes down to who Captain Crunch identifies as. Right? So if he identifies as a British person, then let's just let it lie.
Well, his full name is Captain Horatio Magellan Crunch.
Sounds awfully British to me.
Yeah, and the U.S. Navy. British. Yeah, the U.S. Navy have no record of him ever serving in the U.S. Navy, and that's been checked to make sure that that's the fact. So we're left as to wondering, who the dickens did he serve with?
Yeah. He does. Horatio does sound pretty British.
It does, but one wonders if that was just a like part of the framing of making him think, him think that he's British, and also that everybody else thinks he's British.
I'm not too sure if you've ever thought this one, Paul.
Yeah. I tell you, we went at this hammer and tongs for literally a couple of years, and it was great fun. And of course there are certain parallels. Him accusing him of being British, me saying absolutely not, he's American. We've even had other experts come on the show and say no, he's definitely French. So it could be that we're all wrong. It's absolutely brilliant. I would just like to point out that as we're rapidly running short of time, that we've got Millbilly up next, and I think he's put together a pretty interesting selection of guests, including Magilla, Millbilly himself, Joris. Many thanks to Joris for the list. Fleetside. It's a pretty fearsome a bit of a blokes only affair, but never mind. we've got ladies hour coming up with Sharon and Linda and Diane and Jane. So we've got plenty of ladies chat coming up. But it's the two blokes coming up very shortly. Just final thought, Tracy, on the dude and what we're missing with his absence, because
we're missing a booming voice, aren't we? Where he Richard was a larger than life type of character who was extremely passionate and committed about what he did, and it was infectious. And we all know that he led a lot of people into the case. He got people to act, and he was informed and he was gracious. And it's hard to think that he's actually not part of the community, because it is quite a big committed community of people. Whoever thought that lawyers would become rock stars, right? But this is the land we're living in now. But there's a hole without Richard for sure, But having said that, Paul, you're doing a grand job keeping it going, my friend.
Well, was it just backstage, just before we started? I was explaining about Erekose. His name comes from the Michael Moorcock novel, which means the eternal champion. But what it involves is that Erekose keeps sort of reinventing himself and is being reincarnated, and so from our point of view, certainly within the YouTuber community, I can only say how great it is to see Criminal Justice Natters, a new channel that's coming up, and the great guests that you're able to bring on, and and spread that awareness. So I really do wish Criminal Justice Natters huge success. I mean, we can only dream of ever getting anywhere near the sort of 7,500 subscribers that Erekose had, which I think is pretty amazing. For his professional life, he fitted home automation into the homes of mainly the rich and the wealthy in Los Angeles, obviously Hollywood. He used to send us some of the pictures of some of the stuff he was doing in some of these houses, but for him to be able to get up and talk about these things, dare I say it, Ed, you're involved in the legal system anyway, so maybe you feel obviously more comfortable talking about it, but anybody, I think, can just get up and start talking about these matters, and it's important that they do, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
As Jerry once said, the bad actors are the ones, they're like vampires. They like to hide in the darkness, and by talking about it, we're actually shining a light on these. I nearly swore then, but I'm not going to. These bad actors. I would just like to obviously thank Tracy for coming along and helping me. Ed, if I can get you back again sometime, that would be absolutely brilliant.
I'd love to, Paul.
And just everybody, obviously check out Tracy's 6th Hour podcast. The website, I'm going to get this wrong again.
No.
It wasn't Truth and Justice for Brendan. It's Brendan. Go on, tell me again.
Freedom for Brendan Dassey.
Freedom for Brendan Dassey. That's right. Well, there's a picture, isn't it? An iconic picture of Steve Drizzen, not just with a control question T-shirt, but also one with him with your T-shirt on.
The Free Brendan T-shirts. Yeah. We do a lot of merch for Brendan. Yeah.
Yep.
I do think that you need to get Ed a control question T-shirt.
Oh yes, definitely. We're going to get Ed back on and have a look at this. You'll be familiar with the control question?
No, I don't think so. No.
Fassbender. We know that Teresa had a tattoo, which she didn't.
Right.
Did you see it? and I'll leave the rest because we're rapidly running out of time, because it's about 40 seconds till Millbilly, and we've got in putting this all together, some people think that I'm in charge, but every now and again I would get, it was like a message from the headmaster, Paul, could we have a chat please? So I better put what the dean has put in here. And that's
Indeed.
Please consider donating to the Richard McAdam Advocacy Foundation at PayPal using tramf21@gmail.com, and you can go to the trmaf.com website where I think you'll get that same information. But yes, if you could consider that would be absolutely brilliant, because it's all about helping other people get started with their own YouTube channels, because if we keep talking till they're walking, it'll be good, and it really matters. Dr. Ed, Tracy, many thanks for joining us. We'll see you again.
Thanks for having me.
You're
Thank
very,
you.
very welcome.